Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? Great. So I wanted to give a big shout out to Institute of Play, who helped curate this track. I think there's been an amazing group of speakers here. So to get started today, I want us to just take a minute to relax a little. So make sure both your feet are on the floor. Relax your shoulders. Again, I'm going to walk us through 3 deep breaths, nice and slowly. Okay, so you can just have soft eyes or you can close your eyes. I want you to take 1 breath in, 1, 2, 3, hold it, and breathe out. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3, and breathe out. 1, 2, 3. Last one, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, breathe out. 1, 2, 3. Okay, hello again. Just trying to get everybody grounded and present. So a couple months ago, a mentor of mine passed away, and I think he was a mentor probably for a lot of people in this audience, Bernie DeCoven. And Bernie was best known as one of the founders of the New Games movement. So if you've ever played with a giant parachute in gym class or rolled around one of those big globe balls on the playground or even played ultimate frisbee, you've played a new game. And the movement was founded by Stuart Brand, Pat Harrington, and George Leonard in the 1970s. And it sought to replace competition with cooperation and violence with play. And it was a radical proposition then, and it's still a radical proposition today. And here's another one. So I believe that the internet and online games are 2 of the most powerful learning tools that we have available as a species. And so my question is, what are we going to do with that? If you accept that proposition, what would it take from a socio-technical perspective to design online communities and games that helped kids cultivate creativity, compassion, and civic engagement? And we've seen lots of examples of people doing work in this space, and I want to talk about a particular strand of work that I've been involved in. So just a little bit about me to kind of locate my work. So I am best known for doing work in the design and theorizing of what are called connected learning environments. So these are environments that meet kids where they're at and recognize that kids are growing up in an era of abundance of knowledge, information, and social connection. And I'm trained as a graphic designer, but my work really sits at the intersection between human-computer interaction, game design, and the learning sciences. In 2015, Mizuko Ito, so Mimi Ito, she's giving a keynote tomorrow morning. I think it's the first one. You should definitely go. Mimi Ito, Tara Tiger Brown, and I started an organization called Connected Camps. It was initially a for-profit, but we just transitioned into a nonprofit a year ago. And Connected Camps offers online afternoon labs and summer camps for kids inside of Minecraft. Kids can log in from anywhere. They can learn to code, create media, level up skills in survival or their creative building skills with the help of virtual counselors and other kids. It's a space that we've been able to serve thousands of kids over the past couple years, and it's become a very interesting space for us to study what does it mean to design a kind of equitable and sustainable online platform for kids to do learning together in a connected way. So most of you have probably seen Minecraft. I just wanted to give you a tiny clip of what our programming looks like. So what you'll hear, I'm going to turn on the audio in a second, if I can figure out how to do that. You'll hear a slightly older counselor. So all of our counselors are college students that are studying in game design programs, computer science, philosophy, anthropology programs that are Minecraft experts. Like they grew up playing Minecraft, they're deep into the game, but they also love working with kids. So we train them to be online counselors working with the kids in this space. So you'll hear her. There's a chat log. There's about 19 kids in this space. So chat is one means of communication, but they're also in a TeamSpeak channel together. So they're speaking to each other through voice chat. And over the course of a session, the counselor might divide them into separate voice channels or keep them in a single channel. So I just wanted to give you an example. Okay, no audio. Okay, so I'll just use your imagination, lots of kids talking about what's going on. Nay, the counselor was talking to the kids about there were 3 quests that they could go on. They needed to figure out how to divide up into teams, and they did that on our own. So there were lots of things we observed happening, but one of the most interesting was that kids on our servers were terrible at resolving conflict. Absolutely horrible. Now, this is not atypical, because left to their own devices, 90% of conflicts on a playground, for example, elementary school kids go unresolved, right? They either kids ignore them, they walk away, or they end destructively. So, and the other interesting stat is that 60% of kids, I actually think the number is probably higher, rely on adults to solve their conflict, right? So it is a role that kids grow up knowing that adults are going to kind of swoop in and solve their conflict. And this is true in online games that are moderated, right? The role of the moderators often is to keep the peace in the space, and often that involves sort of swooping in and fixing things. We noticed that many kids on our servers that grieved did so accidentally. So a lot of the conflicts that arose were not intentional. They came about because a kid was new to the space, new to the norms of the server, didn't really understand how things worked, and so they were getting in trouble and getting kicked off the server for things that they weren't intentionally doing. Our counselors were awesome in being very quick to mediate any conflict that arose and get the kids back to playing. And the last thing is that parents see our services as a safe and kid-friendly space. So it's one reason we talk a lot about the work that we do, that we have these moderators. It's a kid-friendly, safe space. But it raises questions around what moderation looks like. What does that mean for young people? So I began to think about, well, maybe there are opportunities, because we have this server with lots of kids and we have these near-peer mentors, to begin to explore the idea of whether or not moderation or these online spaces could be spaces for kids to develop better socio-emotional skills, specifically conflict resolution skills. And we started by studying our moderators and doing a design intervention at the moderator level. When we bring the college students in, we spend a couple weeks training them, and then they work through an apprentice model where they work with some of our existing counselors to sort of learn the ropes. And initially, part of that training was having them develop a code of conduct for how kids were with each other on the server, what might traditionally be called a ladder of discipline. So what happens to ban a kid from the server? How does that happen? When do we contact parents? How long are they out? When do they come back? And we realized that that approach was keeping the peace on the server, but was not enabling the kids to become problem solvers themselves around the conflict. So we began to look at the literature. And one interesting model that we found and began to work with comes from prevention science. It's a framework called I Can Problem Solve. And it looks at 4 different approaches for resolving conflict. And the context of this is really a parent trying to resolve conflict with their child. So on one end of the spectrum, you have the power approach. So this is the parent or the moderator swooping in and sort of squashing the conflict, sending the kid to timeout, separating the kids, sending them to the separate corners, putting the kid in the classroom and cool down. The suggesting approach is where an adult or a moderator might suggest some options, like you might think about this, or you might think about that. The explanation approach is where you don't give the kid a solution, but you explain to them the implications of what they're doing. And then at the far end of the spectrum is a problem-solving approach, where you really give ownership to the child or the children to solve the conflict. And so we thought, okay, this is an interesting model. We could definitely map our work to this. And we wanted to know whether we could move our moderation practices from a power approach to a problem-solving approach. So we studied chat logs and did observation of our servers for a number of months. We began to look at the types of conflict that were happening, which were conflict really over resources, which were conflict that were more social, kind of more drama, friendship stuff happening. And we looked at the training of our counselors. And then we did an intervention to move away from a power approach to a kind of problem-solving approach. So here's an example of a chat log where the moderators were using the old approach. So in the power approach, we actually had a cool-down space on the server. When kids grieved or did something wrong that broke our code of conduct, or were in conflict with another kid, they literally got teleported to the cool down space, and they couldn't get out. Okay, so here you see the interaction. So the mod shintir, right? So you can, just if you're a parent, maybe you can channel this, or a teacher. If you don't follow the rules, we're going to have to take action, right? So the kid's like, what the heck? He's in the cool down space, he can't get out. And then you see his response. He's just like, wah, let me out, okay? A lot of the kids would just log off the server, right? And this created its own problem about trying to resolve something with a child that just disappears, which doesn't really happen in the real world. So this was very interesting. So then, as I said, we worked with our moderators for, it was about 6 weeks. We worked with a conflict resolution specialist named Lynn Hurdle, who's based here in the Bronx. And she walked our counselors through a different way of being with the kids. So the pause and breathe ritual that I opened with today was something she taught the counselors. Like, here's a tool you can use with kids, is you just get them to breathe when something happens. She worked with us around some kind of a different set of scripts, words that the counselors would use when conflict came up, a different kind of orientation and mindset around conflict. So in the beginning, our counselors saw conflict 100% as the color red. If you ask them what color conflict is, they would say it's red. And they saw it as a negative thing that they had to fix. Lynn worked with them over a period of weeks to change that mindset to the mindset that conflict is normal, it's part of everyday life, and it actually affords a creative opportunity for problem solving. So instead of running away from it or seeing it as something negative, let's embrace it as a chance to get innovative around understanding other people, coming up with interesting solutions. And that was a radical shift for our counselors. And so here's an example, sort of 6 weeks later, of the new model which we would place in the problem solving. So Crafty7 is the moderator. So she opens with, well, what just happened in there? So in this case, she asks both kids separately. And then she goes on to ask, well, how does that make you feel, right? So a lot of the literature shows that if you can get kids to connect feeling to motivation, right, they make huge advances around things like conflict resolution. So doing work around getting kids to identify feelings, what it might mean to the other kid. And so then you see at the end this very simple prompt, is there something you could do instead, right? So here the ownership to solve the problem is 100% placed on the child. And what we saw is the kids accepted that opportunity every single time. And they always knew the right thing to do, right? So in a very short period of time, we were able to move from a culture that was like a kind of a policing culture, where if kids were like put in cool down, they could just log off, or they could say, I know, I'm not supposed to do it. But it didn't change behavior. To a culture where kids really owned things that were happening. And this was actually very difficult for our counselors to let go of. So they always say to me, well, even every time we go to a session, we're just not sure that the kids are going to be able to do it. And they do it every time. So it's also this like mindset that we've grown up with, where adults often have solved our problems, and then when we become an adult, we try to solve the kids' problems. So it's interesting. And so our moderators would also sometimes forget, and they would become police again. And the kids who'd been on the servers would start to do this with each other. So we also saw the effects very quickly trickling down into how kids were trying to intervene with each other. I was going to show you an example of what it now looks like, but that's okay. So that first body of work, and this work has been funded by a group called Committee for Children. So they're a group that traditionally has been known for socio-emotional curriculum in schools, in secondary schools. And we're working with a group within Committee for Children that's looking at sort of new spaces for work around socio-emotional learning. So the first phase of work was focused on the moderators. We now are doing a collaboration with them where we're looking at the design of basically a new product within Connected Camp's portfolio, a survival lab that has a strong focus on conflict resolution and leadership skills. And the ultimate goal there is to develop a peer mediation program within online servers that actually could be used across servers across across the world. It would be a kind of training program where kids could get trained to be peer mediators, right? Which we know the effects are quite good in the real world, and we're looking to see if those effects might transfer into the online space.
So my glow
there we go.
for today is that we all work really well together defeating the wither, and also that we had a lot of fun for our last time playing survival camp this week. I had a lot of fun. And a grow would be that we shouldn't just fight each other without any reason. Like, I got killed by a lot of people today that started fighting me for no reason. So I think we should work on not fighting each other for no reason, because if we want to fight like for a fun battle, then yeah, that would be fine, but still don't fight each other without like any reason.
So that's an example of the kids now also create community agreements at the start of any lab that they have with us. And it's an organic living document. Each session they check in around what they've agreed, around how they want to problem solve, how they want to keep each other safe on the server. So that's also been a very interesting process, again, drawn from best practices in the real world. What we're looking at is, Minecraft and gaming in general provides a really interesting context for this work because it's authentic to kids' interests, right? They're deeply engaged in it, and the conflicts are authentic. A lot of the traditional conflict resolution training uses role-playing in the real world, where you're kind of pretending that you're in a fight or something's happening. Well, here in the servers, actual conflicts are happening, and it gives us a chance to work with kids in real time around the work. So Bernie wrote a book called The Well-Played Game, which some of you may have read. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to take a peek at it, especially in these times. It's a heartening read. But he was famous for this line where, and this may not be exactly right, but change the game, not the players. So part of what the New Games movement advocated for was to say, listen, if the game isn't working for you, change the rules, right? So he actually saw modding a game as an act of power, right? That people really have an ability to change their reality if it's not working out for them. That's my existential philosophical reading of that. So the work that we're doing here with Connected Camps, with this notion of really trying to change, put the responsibility of the sort of culture of a server on the kids as opposed to the adults in the space, is really around using a game, modifying in some way the rules of that game, but letting the kids begin to develop capacity as sort of rule designers, as people that understand that they can make changes to the systems and the rules that are organizing how they are with each other to make them lead to a kind of community that they themselves want to be part of. So I left hopefully a little time for questions, but I just want to acknowledge my collaborators. There's a lot of folks that we work with at Connected Camps, and also Peter Slovak is a researcher in London he's an HCI researcher that's been helping us with the project. So I'm going to end there, but I'm happy to answer a couple questions. I think I have 1 minute and 22 seconds left, according to the clock. I'm also happy to learn about other people that are doing work in this area, and you can connect with me afterwards if that's the case. Any questions, comments, observations? Okay, there's one here. Okay. Oh,
hey, Katie.
Yeah. Hey.
Just curious, because I know that you know him. Are you familiar with Peter Senge and Meta Bull's new work in compassionate systems thinking?
Yes.
Because it kind of looks like this, and the ladder of inference and problem solving through the ladder.
Yeah,
of
absolutely,
inference.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great connection to make. There's a yep.
I was just wondering about the balance between the model of problem solving for individual children and the idea of changing the game, not the players. I'm wondering how those two balance with each other.
Well, so the way that I think about it is that when you enter a server space, so I'm thinking about when I think about a game, I think about it at play, right? So a Minecraft server at play often comes with a set of rules and restrictions around it. So servers often put lots of rules in place that limit people from doing certain kinds of things to minimize conflict, right? So with this work, through work on community agreements, for example, kids could choose to take off claims or choose to use log block as a way to look up the history of what has happened in a space rather than that being an administrator tool, which it often is. Does that make sense? So there are constraints of the space that through a kind of social practice, kids have a chance to modify. So ultimately, it is changing the player. It's not changing the player, it's changing the community, right? Through the way that kids are with each other. But it's in that relationship between player action and the kind of design affordances of the play space itself that community really gets developed and grown. So that's how I think about this statement. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. 50. I'm now going, the clock is counting up, so I think I'm finished. But I'm happy to chat with anybody afterwards. Again, I'm really eager to connect with people that are interested in this space or that have research that they would love me to learn about, because I'm always eager to learn more. So thank you so much.